I think one big question in my field, productivity growth, is just how big of an effect can we expect from generative AI and AI technologies in general. My name is Hui Yu. I'm an economist in the Economic Research Department in San Francisco Fed. My research studies what drives broad productivity growth in the US and other contexts. We focus a lot on how market incentives drives adoption of technologies and dissemination of technologies in the economy. I am also the co-head of EERN, which stands for Emerging Tech Economic Research Network. So the reason we started EERN is to understand how emerging technologies like generative AI could affect the economy, not as an after fact, say 20 years after technology has disseminated, but to think about how it can affect the economy now as the technology is developing. We have focused on what research is being done within the Federal Reserve System. We have, of course, papers that are thinking about inflation and the labor market. But in addition to that, people from banking supervision, from financial stability, community development, like many areas, people are thinking about how generative AI could affect those fields. In addition to academia, it's important right now for researchers to also understand how practitioners are using the new technology. And so we have also held CEO roundtables to talk to our business communities as well as our local community in general.
Today, my name is Kevin Ortiz, and I serve as co-head of the Emerging Tech Economic Research Network, or EERN, here at the SFED. We're thrilled to have you all join us today for our EERN seminars are opportunities for academics, researchers, and technologists who are studying the economic impacts of emerging technologies to exchange ideas, learn about research from different sectors, and share insights more broadly with those who are interested in these topics. Our first seminar was an insightful discussion on the potential growth and employment effects of generative artificial intelligence, or GenAI. Today's discussion will go deeper on GenAI's impact on a particular field that is very relevant to us at the Fed. Panelists will talk about GenAI's impacts on the profession, impacts on the economy, and leave economists and researchers watching today with a call to action on areas of further focus. But before we begin, I wanted to say a little more about the why behind EERN. Here at the San Francisco Fed, we believe that being early students of emerging economic trends leads to a better understanding of the future economy. This knowledge is key to fulfilling the Federal Reserve's congressional responsibilities, a safe and sound payments and financial system, and a sustainable economy with full employment and price stability. Through EERN, we are exploring these nascent technologies to better understand potential impacts, to better understand the economy of tomorrow. So to get us started, I'm happy to introduce our distinguished panel to you today. First up, as president, she helps set the nation's monetary policy and works to demystify key economic issues through her speeches and public commentary, thus helping the public engage with the work of the Federal Reserve. Next, we have Dr. Lisa D. Cook, who is a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System since May of 2022. Prior to her appointment, Dr. Cook was a professor of economics and international relations at Michigan State University. We're so happy to have you with us today, Dr. Cook. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Karen Kimbrough, Chief Economist for LinkedIn, where she leads a team devoted to surfacing thought leadership on the world of work. Prior to joining LinkedIn in 2020, she served as the Assistant Treasurer for Google and the Head of Macroeconomic Policy at Bank of America. Welcome, Karen. And then finally, joining us virtually is Dr. Neela Richardson, who is ADP's Chief Economist and ESG Officer. She's also the head of the ADP Research Institute, where she leads economic research and provides reliable and timely analysis for the public, global and local businesses, and policymakers. And our panel today will be moderated by Sunaina Tuteja, the Federal Reserve System's Chief Innovation Officer. Sunaina joined the Fed in 2021 and brings more than 10 years of global experience leading change and innovation at the nexus of finance, technology, and policy. Sunaina will ask our panel a mix of her questions as well as those that were pre-submitted from the audience during registration. I cannot wait to hear the discussion, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panel. Sunaina, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. As the System Innovation Office within the Federal Reserve System, we have the awesome opportunity to work with our 12 reserve banks and the Board of Governors in advancing responsible innovation that helps us solve gnarly problems. Yes, that's an official term. And really create meaningful optionality for the future. And in our responsible innovation framework, one of our cornerstones really is around intentional and evergreen education. And that heuristic is especially true when we interrogate a topic like AI and generative AI, which is moving up the S-curve with a velocity that we haven't seen in a very long time. But also the impact, the proliferation of this technology, just the aperture just keeps widening and widening. So you know, this partnership with EERN is just super symbiotic, and thank you to the SF Fed for hosting this live hybrid event. You know, one of the topics that was evident in the questions that we received was really around this application of AI, GenAI, and into the profession of economic research. So I wondered, Mary, if you could start us off back to our hands-on keys, learning by doing. What is that intersection of this technology and the world of economic research?
Well, thank you. And by the time you leave, you'll have to learn how to do this, because this is Sunaina saying hands-on keys, and that's how we describe everything. So everybody will be doing that by the end. But thanks first for everyone coming. I think this is a really important topic. You know, emerging technologies are always something that we need to get our hands around, but generative AI, because of the velocity of the path over the S-curve, is something that's right here. And so I really wanted to start off with so many distinguished guests saying just three things about what we're learning right now, what we're seeing so far. So the first thing is that I've been, you know, as a labor economist for so many years, we know one thing is always true, is ever reduced employment on net in the history of all technologies. The issue, however, is that it does reallocate economic activity, and there's often a large and painful gap between replacement of skills, augmentation of skills, and the creation of new opportunities, so that gap can often feel like a technology has taken things without giving things back. Now, generative AI, as we're hearing, and AI in general, has this unique opportunity, and we're already seeing it in the field, to replace, augment, and create all in the same time frame. And so that gives us some possibility that this will be not as painful as past technologies. But on the other hand, it has very wide aperture, as you say. Every day there's new uses for it that make people sort of think, oh my gosh, there was an article today that said, can generative AI take the jobs of CEOs? So that's just an expanse that means this is very large. So the key thing one key thing I want you all to leave with is, no one knows the answer right now. If anyone tells you they know the answer, then they're probably overstating their case. What we do know is that there's a very large continuum between AI leaving us with an economy different than what we hoped for, and AI bringing us an economy very much more than what we dreamt of. And how we end up on that, even between the people who are on one side of that continuum or the other in what they're predicting, how we end up or where we end up depends tremendously and completely on us, not the technology. Decisions we make, policies we have, how we engage with it. So it's human-centric in that way, in that we ultimately are the deciders, not the technology. So the second thing I want to start with is that to understand where this is being used and how it's being used, you have to be in the field. So economists have long been in the field doing research. This is something we've all likely participated in, but there's never been a time in my career where it's not more important to understand how it's being used by talking to firms who are using it. So one of the reasons we formed the EERN network is to really get out in the field and collate all the learnings we have. So I just thought I'd give you a few things that we're hearing so far. We do a roundtable with businesses, small, medium, and large, regularly. We're having one later this week. We are talking to firms of all different industries, and what we're hearing are two things that might surprise you. First, AI is being used a lot more than you believe. And generative AI is being used a lot more than you might imagine. It's being used for one of three reasons that really come to the surface. One is that it's cool, it's new, and firms are always looking for ways to make themselves better. The second reason that's often given, though, is our competitors are using it. We don't want to fall behind, so we're going to get on that train. But here's a reason that I've not heard before or studied in past technologies. Employees are bringing it on their iPhones and using it. And as they're using it, we're realizing we better leverage and harness it so that we can get better as a company, or guardrail it so that we don't have undue risk in our portfolio that we didn't account for. So that's a person-driven, employee-driven technology push that I think is part of the velocity over the S-curve that we're seeing. So the second fact, though, is businesses are using it. The second fact that we hear is, yes, we're using it actively, but not for our most valuable prized products, the things that that we're selling that have reputation. So I'm going to use we did not talk to a rocket making company, but I'm going to use it because it's useful to understand. If you're making rockets, you're not using generative AI to build the rocket and there are no employees anymore. You're using it to do back office operations, to look at early schematics, to learn what the research tells you about jet fuel and rocket fuel. You're using it to have inputs to the process, but not to do these other ones. And that's because, as repeatedly we're told, it's not ready yet. So the final thing I'll say is that as economists and economics profession, there's really two ways in which generative AI is going to be transformative to the profession. One is how we use it and what we do with it. And second is what we study because of it. And I would say that the call to action that I want all of you to leave with is use it carefully, because it's the same mantra we've always known. Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data going into your models, you won't get good outcomes from your models, and then you can be misleading and misinformed, and the responsibility is very high on these types of things, because you can do things quickly and easily, but they might not be right. So we have to guard against that. And the second aspect of that is really studying how this can form the economy. It is nascent. And studying so we have evidence to come to bear against these.
Exceptional. Solid is great. Oh, geez. And as a sci-fi nerd, I'm also comforted by your perspective that this technology is not by default completely utopian or dystopian. It is very much predicated on the choices and decisions that we as individuals and institutions make. And with that, Governor Cook, I wonder if I can go to you next. This is the nexus of innovation and emerging technologies, especially AI, is something you have been nerding out about before it became the topic du jour. And I wonder if you could help take that zoom out view and opine on that similar question of the applications in the real world and the impact to the economics profession.
So thank you for the question, and thank you for the. Before I got to the Fed 2 years ago, I was an economist, so 2 decades, working at the intersection of innovation and economic growth. So every question I was asking was, how will it affect economic growth? And the focus was on general purpose technologies. So those are the ones that are technological discoveries of processes that are technological discoveries that will spur more technological discovery and have broad applicability. General purpose technologies have that feature. And Gorillicus said in 1957 that the invention that helps to invent other inventive processes will be the one that will have the greatest economic impact. And those are the ones that I've been studying. And I think that this is the kind of moment we're in right now. So you shouldn't believe the hype about the hype, right? Because economists are always thinking about, and I wouldn't say that we're just focused on general purpose technologies. Certainly some economists are focused on specific inventions, specific innovations, and specific applications. But macroeconomists are often focused on general purpose technologies. So I think that we have to think about the applications, but not in and of themselves, and not as disembodied from us. So I think you're right in thinking about how humans interact with generative AI. But that's a question we have to continually ask. And I think there's a large research agenda for economists. And one thing that I was doing also as a macroeconomist who was interested in innovation was focusing on the data. I have several articles on flaws in several large data sets and how we should correct them. And these are magnified, as you know, when algorithms are trained on these data and some data are proprietary. We should, as economists being responsible, we should try to help clean up these data and make everybody responsible in the food chain in developing generative AI. But I think that the possibilities are endless if we take care of these problems that could be general constraints. But I don't think we take a position where we're calling balls and strikes. We're not saying that we're techno, okay, I'm not saying, okay, so I shouldn't say we. I don't speak for the committee. But I am saying that we should be calling balls and strikes and asking how they affect the dual mandate, for example. And that's what I started asking when I came to the Fed. How does it affect our mandate of maximum employment and stable prices? And certainly, I was asking before how they affect, AIs affect economic. But now I'm asking more about employment because that's part of the dual mandate. I'm asking about competition because, of course, competition policy could affect, and the way firms compete can affect inflation. And we know that. If there can be price changes that are automatic, that are a result of an algorithm, they can go in two different directions. We have a lot of information. Just before the pandemic, we had a lot of information about how two major firms competed online, and therefore we were getting lower prices. Inflation was going down. But now you can think about a world where they would be competing on prices going up. So I'm saying you have to be agnostic about the possibility, what the outcome might be, but this is the framework that I'm thinking about it in, one that relates to the dual mandate. And of course, I am worried about inequality. This is something that I worried about in my previous life a lot with STEM education, even the training that we have to be able to produce generative AI or any type of AI. And we should think about the output as well, not just the inputs, but the output.
I really like the durability of that question, which is, what is the economic impact of the innovation? And it's often a question we as innovators ask ourselves from an application perspective. And one of the aha moments I'm having is, wow, innovation and economists, we're like BFFs. Maybe we just didn't know it. We interrogate similar questions, but from different vantage points. So thank you for setting the stage, and we'll double click on some of those themes. One of the cool things about these immersive education events at the Fed is we obviously benefit from the expertise of our Fed experts as represented here, but also bring in outside-in perspectives, right? So we're bringing in new inputs as we interrogate this within the Fed. And with that, Karen, let me welcome you to the conversation. As the chief economist at LinkedIn, I'm sure you guys are thinking about applying this technology within the realm of your work, but you also have this really cool vantage point of looking at the activity on LinkedIn. So I wonder if you might, start us off with a few perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you to the San Francisco Fed and to Mary for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm very excited to be here. So one of the things that we've spent a lot of time doing is trying to understand how AI has been around for a long time now. Is having its impact on the workforce. And the first thing I would say is it's absolutely early days, right? I'm in no way trying to predict, as Mary said, there's no way to predict the outcome. It'll be human-centered, depending on how we influence generative AI's direction. But we do see a few signals in the marketplace already, and maybe I could just share one or two. First thing I would say is, one, we see people, to Mary's point, starting to bring their own AI to work. The idea that people are actually playing around with it is not just a concept. We actually see it when we interviewed 31,000 knowledge workers around the globe. 75% of them said, yeah, I've tried AI at work, or generative AI. But most of them said, no, it wasn't. They're already exploring it, and their employees are ahead of the employers in that space. So that's one thing to note. Two is we see enormous growth in different professionals adding skills to their profiles. Some of this may be reactive, it might be from a place of anxiety, but they're adding generative AI skills to their profiles. There was a 162 times increase in the past year. And it was particularly fast natives. So people in marketing, I know we're a group of economists, I'm going to get to economists in a second, I promise, but people in marketing, people in design, people in fields where there was a lot of writing, they were the ones that were kind of at the forefront of adding these skills. So is it a push or a pull? Time will tell, but everyone's adding, but they're adding very quickly. Do you want me to stop here, or do you want me to talk a little about skills, or save it for later?
Why don't you tease us a little, and then we can double click.
All right, I'll tease a little. So I wanna put out to you an idea that the way we're thinking about it is, one, there's lots of different types of skills. Of course, a job is a collection of tasks. Those tasks require skills. There are domain skills. There are digital skills, and then there's what you might call the human skills, right? And so every job needs a mix of those. What we're finding is obviously some of those skills can rapidly, or the tasks that require those skills can rapidly be performed by generative AI, others not so much, right? And so with any collection of tasks and skills in your space, my argument is you're probably going to be rotating away from some towards other. It's not that your job is going to be totally changed or go away necessarily, but you're going to do a different type of work in your job than you did of how they spent their time and what tasks they did. So this is just a continuation, but it's a little bit of an acceleration in that rotation amongst different skills. And so I'll tease you and let you come back to me with, we actually looked at what are the top 30 to 50 skills of economists, and I'll just say economists generally, and then how do they map across this 2x2 of, say, things that are going to complement or augment me, or things that are going to, eventually I'll be replaced by generative AI. And so we mapped all those out, and I'll just leave you, I think it's time for you to stop talking. I'll just leave you with the thought that initially I was like, where are the economists on this? Are we the ones who are going to be displaced? And my team was like, we're kind of like on the border of displaced. Oh. And I was like, ah! But in fact, when you open up that bag of skills, there's a whole lot of skills that are in no way going to be displaced, that are much more likely to be augmented. So.
Are you sure you're not a marketer? That was a strong tease. And excuse me while I update my LinkedIn profile with all the right hashtag.
I think all the economists in the room are doing the same thing.
Hands on keys, hands on keys.
Public speaking is one of the skills. So
lovely, thank you. And let me welcome Neela, our friend in the metaverse, to the conversation. Neela, again, your vantage point at ADP gives you that bird's eye view. So I wonder if you could start there on what you're sensing and scanning in terms of the real world applications.
Well, hello. I love the question. I first want to certify that I'm not a robot, just in case there's any doubt. I'm not a generative AI prompt, though that could make life easier at times, not this time. But I'm actually quite pleased to join this panel. I've benefited from the research of the three women you have on that panel, so it's fantastic to join them, well, not in person, but virtually. So great to see you all. And thank you to the San Francisco Fed for the invitation. I want to kind of couch my remarks around this idea of data. If we treat it well now, we can help attain that future that Mary talked about, that we all aspire to. If we don't treat data right from the beginning, I think we're going to have some problems down the road. So my thoughts are about data, also about innovation and productivity. ADP is a human capital management company, and it means a lot of things, but one thing it for sure means is that we are constantly thinking about what employers are trying to handle right now with their workforce, and they're handling and trying to think through a lot. You have 5 generations under one roof. You have a Gen Z generation that is sometimes largely remote and doing things differently. You have a digital workforce that is more digital than you've ever seen before. You have change that is global. Even if you're local as a business, you're affected by the global change that's here and now. And so Gen AI is just one of several demographic factors that the employer is trying to understand. And so when we do global workforce studies, we want to understand what employees think about AI. And what they think is, yes, it's going to change their jobs, but there's no agreement on how or when. And so this is where I think economics can be helpful, not just in its descriptive capacity, but in its old school prescriptive capacity by really laying out the outcomes that we would like to see. And what we learn in economics, what we learn in grad school, is that there's only one way, what I learned from Lisa Cook's research, there's only one way economies grow. And that's when there are more workers and those workers get more productive. And so the through line of all of these issues employers are facing is productivity and how do we become, as a workforce, more productive, even economists, more productive. So that's where data comes in and the considerations that I think all researchers have to be aware of and have to be very loud about. And what gives me optimism about the economics profession is we have these tools already. These are the tools in the toolbox that we agonized over for years, some of us, to get right, or at least have a proper understanding of how to treat data. And so one of the data requirements, I think, is privacy, especially when you're talking about people. Some of AI's greatest contributions will involve sensitive personal data, healthcare, payroll. No one even wants to talk about their wages now. They certainly don't want AI, talking about their wages in broadcasting. So how do you protect that privacy and still get the benefit of that information? So that's a couple of things. The second is documenting those methods that lead to bias or reduce that biasness in data. We talked about that. The outcomes are only going to be as good as the inputs, and we want to make sure that those inputs are representative of the communities in which that data is going to be affecting change. And so that's really critically important to understand a great role when understanding data in terms of communicating with the public, especially Federal Reserve economists, particularly you all, because you are on the forefront of communicating policy decisions all the time. And since there's so much ambiguity in the workforce, sometimes anxiety or concern of how these technologies will land, the Fed plays a big role in that transparent communication of what's really going on in the data and how it's affecting the labor market. And that's going to require not something that you are very good at, which is partnership. The data is in the companies by and large. There are some big, large-scale data that are in the public sphere, but most of that rich data set that researchers need and want to study are with companies. And so that public-private partnership, that thing that the Fed does so well in understanding the economy, I think will be critical when we think about
as we interrogate the application. And I want to welcome the three of you if you wanted to double click on any of the themes around data. Lisa?
Well, I think data acquisition is just so critical to this enterprise, to generative AI. And who controls the data, as Neela was saying, is absolutely important for competition purposes, for example. Who gets to compete in this landscape? Who these data? So this is something economists absolutely have to be concerned about. Addressing the issues that you were talking about, privacy, bias, inequality of outcomes, testing. Certainly these are things that I think are really important. So economists definitely have a role. I agree with Neela on that. Yeah.
Mary, on that through line, be it the data component or the overall application of AI, what should economists keep in mind to ensure that it doesn't reinforce existing biases or inequities?
I think it's a really important question, and I started with that. Neela said it, Governor Cook, you said it, we've all said it, Karen said it, that it really is inputs determine your outputs. And what economists are going to have to do more than ever, I think we've always had this sense in our profession, but now it's even more important. When you use a publicly available data set, the data set, the random sampling of the individuals in the data set, and so I can use it, and now my analysis is my value add. But when you're using company-provided data or you're putting together a variety of other companies' data, a bunch of things, you have to make sure that your sample is complete. So healthcare is an example that all of us can understand. You don't want a generative AI model simply trained on one portion of the population. Let's take, if we only train it on older Americans or older people, then how are we going to understand how it affects younger people? anywhere in the world. So you have to understand those things, and you have to, as an economist, when you're studying, ask the first and starting question, are my data complete? And if they're not complete, what are the things I'm actually answering? And we all are good at that. You don't have to have a complete data set. You don't have to have truth with a capital T to do your analysis, but you have to be very, very clear. It is our personal responsibility to be clear about what we can and can't answer with the outcome that we generate from our models. That's always true, but I think the generative AI space makes it even more important. We've suddenly become the data checkers more so than we ever were. And as you mentioned, Lisa, you've done papers on where data can lead you astray. And I just think that problem is now much more pervasive than it was before, but it's manageable as long as we're focused on that responsibility. I think the other thing is to ensure that we're always communicating what we do and don't know about this. And that is something that, you're taught in graduate school to sell your work. And that's an important component of being in the profession. But I think it's also important to tell people what it is and isn't. It's as important now as ever to say, this is what I understand from what I've done, and this is what I cannot know from what I've done. And communicating that to the public, whether you're in the Fed or not, I think is increasingly important as we worry about not only model hallucination, but I think more importantly, there's incomplete information that goes in to the models that we're training.
And I think that advice is so apropos even to the work that our colleagues within the Fed are doing and experimentation that's happening outside of the Fed, where as we test for the viability and the feasibility of the use cases in experimentation, we have to guard against the same biases and hallucination. It reminds me of, what was that advice that we got from Spider-Man? With great powers come great responsibilities, right? So, Karen, happy to have you weigh in on the data set, on the data piece, but then, yes, you've teased us, and we want to get into the skills conversation.
Sure. So, yeah, I'll add to I think the data, you guys have all said it, you women have all said it perfectly. I'll give you an example. At LinkedIn, we have 1 billion members. They're not all active at the same time, right? But it gives us an insight into a lot of different career paths and a lot of different opportunities that people either seek out or have presented to them. And it's a super rich data set. It's also incredibly noisy. I know this is gonna be televised LinkedIn, forgive me, but it is a great representation for certain industries and for others, not so much. And so I'm always really careful, I don't know, we do have data, let's pick a country, in Argentina, but do we capture all of Argentina's labor market or just certain professional sectors? And so I think it's incumbent upon us just to kind of retain that critical thinking skill. Becomes even more important when you're presented with opportunities to kind of twist and manipulate the data in lots of different ways. I also don't think that, for example, generative AI is great at predicting things that are kind of new and innovative. I think it's great at telling us how things were in heavily regulated patterns in the past, but I don't believe it's going to come up with something new like a theory of relativity. So it's just a statistical model. On the skill front, I did ask our team to take a look at what are all the skills economists have. I was delighted to think that I actually have a couple of them on this piece of paper, and I was thrilled. Maybe my job is saved. But again, I wanted to just sort of push you in the sense of AI. One thing I would say is we make a distinction between AI expertise and AI literacy or AI aptitude. And AI expertise is I'm training large language models, I'm an expert in computer vision or speech recognition. Fantastic, that's AI expertise. You may have worked in that space for a couple of years. At a tech company, that sounds like expertise to me. AI literacy or AI aptitude is I know how to use DALL-E, I know how to create images online, I know how to use ChatGPT or Copilot. Fantastic. That's a different kind of AI skill in my mind. So we do make that distinction between experts and general users. And I say this because I think sometimes when I talk to people oh my God, I need to know much more about AI. And as Mary was doing this, that's exactly what's going to happen. People are going to play or figure out how it helps them in their own job, whether they're in finance or HR or in research. And so for us here who are in the kind of economics research domain, There are definitely skills that kind of rank in there's not that much human value add, forgive me for saying this, and that generative AI or AI type tools can probably start to do more and more of. And a lot of that has to do with coding. A lot of that's like the R, the Stata, the Python, we were talking earlier about. All of that kind of sits in like, yeah, there's some human value add in actually coding, but generative AI can probably at one point be doing a lot more of that for you. Inference, understanding, like interpreting what it means, the kind of so what part of it is incredibly important and nuanced and requires a lot of human trade-offs and understanding of different contexts that like we don't expect generative AI to do. So there's skills range from things that are like very much like time series and econometrics, and communication is the #1 skill that is requested on any job of the like 14 to 15 million jobs on our platform. It's communication, and then it's management. It's another one that economists are often expected to have, and public speaking. So these are all super important communication skills. In the domain space, a lot of the domain knowledge is not something that generative AI is going to be great at. It's not going to be great at doing labor economics, energy economics, health economics. It might be adequate at explaining the Phillips curve, but is it going to explain all the different types of analysis around the Phillips curve and what might be appropriate, right? So I say this to kind of just reassure people that domain knowledge is incredibly important. So too are human skills. And then the technical digital skills are the ones that just change really quickly. So yeah, you should get them, but I'm sad to say, as somebody who spent an awful lot of time trying to learn MATLAB and SAS, like I don't use it anymore, right? Everybody's moved on to Python. So the skills range, and I just want to leave you with one thought, which is that a lot of these skills, you're going to be pivoting towards things where you have more value add, and let generative AI take over the things that are routine, and you're going to be using your critical thinking, your analysis, your public policy applications to kind of make a true value out of our work.
Thank you. And two things I extract from that. Like one is the human in the loop is critical, right? Like while this technology is demonstrating its potential to be your co-pilot, it's not autopilot mode anymore in any near term or the type of task. But I think you underscored, all of you, but especially Karen, your response, like the importance of always be leveling up, right? Like as humans, like the work we do might stay consistent, but how we do it, even in your example, will keep evolving and changing. So I think that heuristic is very important. Governor Cook, let me welcome you in. Yeah.
Well, I have two thoughts about this. First of all, thinking about my own obsolescence, I enrolled in this course, and this was when I was the director of the American Economic Association summer program. So I was not only thinking about the skills I need, but the skills they need going forward. And I sat through a machine learning course during the week of my birthday in the middle of the summer, because I think that this was important enough to the economics profession. To me, it was the equivalent of the empirical revolution. We have a lot more data. We need to know how to handle these data, and those we are training. These are undergraduates. For those who don't know, the American Economic Association Summer Program. These are undergraduates who are interested in pursuing PhDs in economics, and we're trying to train them. And I sat through that class, and I just thought about all of the applications to economics every single day, and that it really, generative AI really requires us thinking that we might be able to think differently about hypotheses, about data collection, about questions. So the thought in economics is you typically go where the street lamp is, where the street lamp has elucidated a certain question. Well, my history and my research in the past have suggested we're never looking hard enough, because some dogs don't bark. You should go where there are non-barking dogs, and that's, to me, where generative AI could be extremely helpful. And if we're talking about the difference between, and I think this is something that's an underlying thing, judgment and prediction. I think it's absolutely critical to think that way. AI can help us with prediction. It can't replace human judgment. And I think that the work that Josh Gans, Ajay Agarwal, and Avi Goldfarb have done on the interaction between the two is something that's going to be critical for economists going forward. We have to keep thinking about that. but we should use it for good where we need complements to push us forward. We need theory, for example, when say our macro models break down and we have these patterns that can be exploited, we need theory to pick it up from there. So it's not just empirical work that we're talking about. Or we've largely been talking about empirical work, but it's not just empirical work. It is also theory that could benefit, in my view, from identifying these patterns that may not have been identified before.
Mary, one thing I know about you is your mental model of perpetual beta. Always, you know, and I know you went way to the Wayback Machine with some of the OG technologies as you're learning about
I did
some
go
of
way
the new.
back.
I wonder if you could share that perspective.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know I was being called out on that. So I got all interested in this because it's interesting to think about the following thing. ChatGPT came out on Thanksgiving of 2022, and everybody suddenly learned about AI. But AI has been around for decades and decades. And so I went back all the way to the perceptron, which was the first, go look it up. It's the very first attempt to build a generative AI machine. And it has the algorithms and other things. But if you look at how it was done and the math that went into it, you learn something very quickly that Karen just mentioned. It's a statistical way to think about the world, and it's very good, as you just mentioned, Lisa, at prediction, but not judgment. And so when you go into the Wayback Machine, and I would highly recommend it. I mean, if you're an economist, you're sort of a historian. You want to go back to the OG, as you called it. But I do think it helps you because it helps us all recognize something, I think, really important. Karen, when you were talking about skills, or at least when you were talking about prediction versus judgment, I kept asking myself, saying this to all of you as economists, think of the economist you admire the most, and then ask yourself, do you admire that person because they were great coders or great thinkers? And AI, generative AI, does not think. It predicts based on, it's really a prisoner of its past knowledge. Imagination is the piece that cannot be easily replaced right now.
Neela, I'd love to hear your perspectives on how economists and the economics profession should be, you know, learning new skills or retrofitting existing skills in the age of AI.
Yeah, I think I'm informed by sitting with some humans, also known as call center operators. So as I mentioned, ADP provides payroll and human capital services, and payroll can be really complex depending where you are. A lot of companies, even ones that operate locally, are thinking globally in terms of their workforce now because of these digital environments. And so every jurisdiction, every county could have different tax implications. And it's hard for one person to keep all of that in their heads. It's actually impossible. And so what happens is new people are coming on board to be call center operators, but it's a huge economist skills. I'm going to answer a little bit more generally is like, what problem are we trying to solve? And the real innovation here, we think it's in tech. It's not. The innovation is in humans. That's what GenAI promises. How do you get humans to innovate away from standard practices and protocols that limit their productivity? So going back to that call center operator, what if you could give them the tools right at their fingertips to know every kind of payroll structure there is in the country? Well, it's possible. And, you know, ADP has worked really hard for decades rolling out this kind of technology to our call center operators. Well, what does that unlock? It unlocks a partnership that's different than we've seen before, a partnership that's not reactive. A customer calls with a problem and you solve it on the fly. It's proactive. I see you're hiring in Brazil. I see you're hiring down the road in another state that's very adjacent to the state you're hiring. What are the tax implications that you should be aware of? In terms of research, though, it requires another innovation, too, because when we do research and we looked at 50 million workers who were working in the last 4 years, what we found was that only 4% of them were upskilled. 4%. So you're talking about a world of continuous change where skills are both expiring like eggs or not even as long as the shelf life of eggs. And yet only 4% of these workers were actually upskilled. So that's a technological change on the part of hiring managers and companies. Like, how do we continuously upskill our workforce so that they can keep up with all this innovation that we want to do? Because if they don't keep up, then our innovation is for naught. And I think this is the problem to solve. Whatever skills you're talking about, whether it's an economist or a call center operator, it's like, how do you keep up with the pace of change? That's the problem. And I think GenAI can be helpful actually in solving that problem, but it requires humans to change their way that they've been doing business and working. And that's why it's unpredictable. It's not unpredictable because of the tech. It's unpredictable because of the people using the tech. And that's what makes it exciting too.
We prompt engineers for the humans more than we need for the AI models. So, I think the subset of the conversation thus far is leading us really nicely to a question that came up most often from our audience. So as they registered, we asked them what question they wanted to ask. And it really is, as we talked about the evolving skills, the application and the widening aperture of the application, and it's touching every category, every industry. How do we extrapolate all of these activities to start thinking about the impact to the overall US economic productivity and growth? And I wonder, how are you even starting to interrogate that big macro question? And Karen, maybe we can start with you.
Okay, we'll go down the line.
Yeah.
Sure. So at the simplest, maybe I'm picking up where Neil left off, but at the simplest question, we did do some survey work where we asked people, hey, you're a power user of some GPT technology. Why do you use it? And 8 out of 10 of them said, well, it makes my work more enjoyable because there's some things I don't have to do. I don't have to, summarize this meeting or write up the notes from something that I attended. They'll do that for me. 9 out of 10 said, the ones who really were power users who were using it a couple times a week at least, said it saves me up to 30 minutes a day, up to 30 minutes a day. So in a month, that's a whole extra day. So there's a certain element of saving time. I get to spend more time on the things that are more cognitively interesting. So people are kind of voting with their fingers or their feet, if you will. And then if I can, I'll just add one other comment. We've been looking at productivity through the lens of software engineers, because that's a really easy cohort to evaluate. There's lots of ways, standardized ways of measuring their output. And one of the things that we see is that when they go onto things like GitHub Copilot and they start to use these tools, they're writing more lines of code. They're also investing more in their own skills. And so it seems and the next question for us is, well, are they actually getting different jobs? Is this productivity leading to a different job outcome than the counterfactual? But we are seeing them acquiring more skills faster and getting more lines of code written. And so we suspect, but time will tell, whether or not they're actually realizing the benefits of productivity in terms of actually maybe getting to that higher wage stage and a better job.
So I want to double click, as Sunaina is saying, on one point that Mary was talking about, and that's humility.
Yes.
Because I think that there are lots of measurement issues with productivity. That's not new. That's absolutely not new. That's a long-standing issue. But there's another measurement problem, and that's that people who are answering the surveys, you all have a different sample, are not the people who are using AI and who have the official policy related to AI. So there was recently a survey done by some organization, I think it may have been the Conference Board, asking employers and employees same question: to what extent are you using AI? There's a big gap, a really big gap. And that is consistent with what you're saying. And I think that this technology use from bottom up is something that we saw in Japanese production, car production, a period earlier that just, obliterated the US car industry. So I'm just saying that we have to be very humble about how we're measuring outcomes, because we traditionally measure them in one way, but those people who are using it may not be, and who are the drivers who are possibly being responded to by companies we don't know, But they're not the ones answering the survey. So I'm just saying that a dose of humility is always warranted from us economists.
Indeed. And I think that's such good advice, even to the folks that are testing the application of it, that blend of humility with curiosity,
Yes.
right? So I think thank you for that reminder. Mary, preeminent labor economist, how are you thinking about the long term? I know you teased us a little bit in your intro. Anything you want to double click?
You know what I think of is this, and it goes to this point that many of us have made, and just recently both Karen and Lisa made it, is that you know what's very different about this technology? If you think of all technologies, think of the steam engine, electrification, electrical circuit, or even their computer, and say, I'm going to be more productive. What's really interesting right now, and I think is the potential to be so dynamic and change the equation in a meaningful way, is that employees are bringing this technology to work. They're figuring it out. And so then what can happen is we can be in our systems, either employment systems or firm systems. This is what point Neela was making. The firms can catch up and say, how do we harness and leverage this in a positive direction? But also society needs to catch up. If we don't allow, I think of AI, potentially generative AI, potentially being an equalizer. Think of David Autor, he's written about this. It has the potential to make, think about physician's assistants, much more able to help frontline diagnostics and treatment plans using a generative AI assistant. But that only works if we allow the rules that govern rather who gets to use it and who doesn't, and who gets to diagnose and who doesn't, and who gets to give a treatment plan and who doesn't, if we only have the rules that allow that to happen. And the data coming into those models that allow us to understand different populations. So there's a whole collection of things that has to happen to take enthusiasm for what could be and make that a reality. And I think any of those steps along the way that we aren't intentional about, we don't have the conversations, we don't recognize how critical they are, they can derail this and make this something that's used only to partially its opportunity level, or in the worst case, what the worriers think of, which is much about how it bridles the economy as opposed to is a tailwind. Think about headwinds and tailwinds. Generative AI has the possibility to be a tailwind, and we could use a tailwind, right? We could use more growth, an ever expanding pie, but unless we do it well, then it can be a pretty large headwind.
That's helpful, because you're right. Like, you need the overall architecture, but also the incentive models around it to evolve. So I'm getting believe it or not, like, what a mind-expanding conversation. I'm getting the 5-minute mark. So one question I have for all of you, and Neela, we'll start with you, is what resources are you leaning into to flex your curiosity and to level up? Are there favorite podcasts, things that you read? Share some resources with our colleagues here.
Absolutely happy to. I think one of the biggest tools in the Economist Toolkit is backward induction, like imagining the world you want and taking steps to get there. And that's where I land when it comes to what I'm interested in, what I really double click on. I can't understand the universe. I'm not Karen Kimbrough, but
There's a few other people here.
What my main concern as a representative of a B2B business and human capital, and that's skills transitions. And we've partnered with Stanford University, Stanford Digital Economy Lab. And so having the opportunity to talk to technologists, to be in the room, and those multidisciplinary conversations are really critical to me. It goes beyond what I read, it's who I talk to. Yes. And I think getting a 360 view of everything. And when I talk to, I don't just mean AI experts. I mean the folks in the breadline, like the people who are going to feel this technology thrusted in some cases upon them. In some cases, they're going to be thrusting it back to their employer. And so I'm looking for ways to match the expertise of technology with the person who's going to be doing the work. And I think those ways are all around innovation, trust, and adoption. I always say you get a new technology is rolled out to the workforce and the workforce rolls its eyes in return. That's not productivity. That's a stalemate. So I guess to answer your question, I read broadly. I read, what's in the popular business journals, but I also think about it through the lens of the person and the lens of the expert and try to figure out what's the gap and what's the opportunity.
And definitely follow Neela. I've been fangirling her since she was on Planet Money and NPR many years ago. So, Karen, what do you read? What do you listen to? How do you keep up with this?
Well, I do follow Neela. I will say that. So the appreciation is mutual. So I just read a book. It's a pretty short book, and NBR had just released it, and I can't remember the author, so please forgive me for that. But it was on AI and healthcare, and I know nothing about healthcare other than as a user, a confused user. It's like, why is my bill so high? But it was just fascinating because as I think about how AI is changing and influencing the direction of healthcare, it expands my mind to say, well, what's going to happen in any other domain, whether it's energy or you name it, or the environment. And so I've been reading a lot. I've been really interested in the concept of like adoption speed, because the data that I see, and I do this with full humility, is that adoption speed seems really fast. I don't know if I'm just like looking in some kind of mirror. I'm in an echo chamber at LinkedIn. I'm like, oh. But it seems really fast, much faster than other technologies. So I'm really interested in this. And I say that because I see skill adoption happening across so many different sectors. Like it's not just finance or professional services or education. It's retail, it's manufacturing. There are people in all domains and sectors that are adopting AI skills. And increasingly, it's not just the folks who work in the IT group. And so that makes it interesting to me. I'm like, oh, it's somebody in marketing. It's somebody, in research. It's somebody in finance within, a Procter & Gamble type company. So like people across all different types of divisions in an organization are starting to explore. And so that tells me something else about the adoption speed. So I'm really fascinated by that. I follow Neela. I've been reading widely, and I would say that if I had one plea, can I make one like shameless sales plea?
Do it.
All right.
Do it.
Is please come to LinkedIn. I am busy within LinkedIn trying to create like an econ community, and I would love to have interested folks such as yourselves, thought leaders such as my panelists here, to come on and like drop knowledge bombs in LinkedIn. We don't want to be just broetry of, I'm so pleased to announce, like, say something interesting, We love that stuff. I'd love to have more content. So I want to encourage all of you to come on LinkedIn and drop some knowledge bombs on us about
knowledge
AI.
bombs coming your way. All right.
I'm picking up a lot of cool lingo today.
Right? Well, and the nerds and the normies getting along.
Nerds and the normies. There's another one for our bucket.
Governor Cook, what are you listening, reading? How do you keep up?
So several different ways. So first of all, I put myself in a chair to learn something for a week during my birthday.
Oh,
okay, so
true.
that's how I learned machine learning and figured out what I didn't know, so that I could keep up with the things that I was really interested in. So I then picked up the accounts, and I've talked to you all about the various accounts on social media that I follow, and some of them are useful and some of them are not. So I really but all of them are interesting. Right, so I observe things that way, but I constantly talk to financial firms, just like, I think we all talk to a broad set of firms as people at the Federal Reserve, but I especially talk to financial firms, and I hear how the technology is being used at those financial firms. So that has implications for the financial system, for the economy, so I really learn from them, but then the other folks we talk to, and looking after both sides of the dual mandate, certainly want to know how other firms are using these technologies and how they can augment employment.
That's great. Getting real, Mary.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for that. So I First of all, I have to say this is a really great panel, and I could use other words you've taught me, but I'm not going to because I don't know if they're the right context
There's a Sanena ChatGPT version.
Yes, exactly. but this is a really terrific panel. When I think about this, I mean, you already called me out on I'm an early student of the perceptron and things, but one of the things that's really important, and Governor Cook and I sit in the same role in this way, is that ultimately our work at the Fed is disciplined by the dual mandate, the goals that Congress gave us, the payment system, the financial system, and monetary policy. And then monetary policy, it's really the dual mandate. So I'm going to go back to where Neela started and say, in order to really understand this, you cannot look at the productivity statistics. You can't look at just a few surveys. You can't look at the textbook models. You have to get out there and talk to people. And whether we spend a lot of time talking to financial firms, but we spend equal amounts of time, I would say, talking to manufacturers and retailers and construction firms and global entities and small businesses that have just a few people. And what I've learned as you go up and down this is you can find out so many things by simply asking someone who's running a business or is a doctor or anything. You want to know your doctor, when you're in the doctor's office, say, do you have a generative AI product that's helping you? And then they'll show you, or they show me, I say, yes, here it is, here's what it looks like. But really what you see when you do that is that this technology is already everywhere. It's being used at different intensities. It's being used for very different things, none of it as fantastical as some of the things we hear it could do one day, but all of it is likely changing aspects of the economy. So the question for a policymaker isn't, is it happening? It is happening. It's, is it happening at scale that changes in a very material way our dual mandate goals or the possibilities, right? Is it going to shape inflation in a way that we need to understand? And is it going to shape employment in a way we have to understand? We know it will. The question is, it has it already. And I think for all of us, it's really about, it's so nascent, you can't say in the next 3 months or 6 months, this will be the effect. But you have to be ready. And that's why I'll go all the way back to where Kevin Ortiz started. You have to be an early student. And I just appreciate everyone on this panel for being an early student of this.
Well said. Give it up for the baller panel.
She said it. I couldn't say it.
Thank you.
Please remain seated. Our next session will begin shortly.